She thought it was funny, the way I bent down in the dirt with my hands stained red from the berries I'd picked. She laughed at me, at my harvest, at the juice running down my chin like I was some clumsy child. But then, before I could even wipe it away, she leaned in and licked it right off me. In that small, reckless moment, everything changed. Our laughter turned into silence, our eyes locked, and the air between us grew heavier than the summer sun. The first time I saw her, the field was breathing in the late afternoon light. The sun was heavy, making the soil smell rich and alive, and I was bent down, basket beside me, filling it with strawberries. My hands were sticky with their sweetness, my shirt clung to me with sweat, and I didn't care because the harvest was good that year. I worked alone most days, humming to myself, losing track of time in the rhythm of picking and wiping, picking and wiping. Then I heard it, her laugh. It wasn't sharp or cruel at first, just sudden, like a bell ringing out of nowhere. I looked up, confused, brushing my hair from my face with a stained hand, and there she was. She leaned against the old wooden fence, her dress light, her arms crossed, and her smile like she knew something I didn't. She had been watching me long enough to catch me mid-bite, the berry juice running down my chin before I could swallow. That's when she laughed harder, a kind of laugh that filled the air like it belonged there. For a moment, I felt heat rise to my face, embarrassment mixing with the sticky sweetness on my lips, and I wanted to wipe it all away, to hide. But something in her eyes told me not to. She walked closer, her steps slow, deliberate, almost teasing, like she wanted to see what I would do. I froze, caught between pride and shame, my heart beating harder than it should. When she reached me, she tilted her head, studied me, and without asking, she leaned in so close I could feel the warmth of her breath. Before I even knew what was happening, she licked the juice right off my chin. The world seemed to stop. My breath caught in my throat. Her lips had brushed me, soft and daring, leaving behind something far more powerful than the sweetness of the berry. I wanted to move, to say something, anything, but my body betrayed me and stayed still, trembling from the sudden rush in my veins. She smiled like she had just done the simplest thing in the world, like she hadn't just turned everything I knew upside down. And then she whispered, "You missed a spot." That moment stretched into eternity. The field, the heat, the dirt, the birds overhead, all of it disappeared, and there was only her. I didn't even know her name yet, but I knew this wasn't going to be something small or forgettable. She had carved herself into me with one fearless act, and I couldn't look away. She leaned back finally, her smile curling with mischief, her eyes holding me in place. I hated that she had the power to make me feel both ridiculous and alive in the same breath. I wanted to ask her who she was, why she was here, why she thought she could just walk into my world like that. But instead, the only words that escaped my lips were broken, soft, and clumsy. "Why did you do that?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the basket full of berries, then back up at me, and her grin softened into something warmer, almost tender. "Because you looked too sweet to waste," she said, and then she turned as if to leave. I stood there, gripping my basket, my hands trembling with the weight of something I couldn't yet name. I knew I should get back to work, but my mind was no longer on the fruit or the soil. It was on her. Every step she took away from me echoed louder than it should have, and I found myself wishing she would stop, turn back, say something more, anything more. But she didn't. She just left me standing there, sticky with juice and aching with a new kind of hunger that had nothing to do with the harvest in front of me. That night, when I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I could still feel the ghost of her lips against my skin, could still hear her laugh threading through the silence of my room. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment, just a silly encounter. But deep inside, I knew better. Something had been planted in me that day, something stronger than roots, something I wasn't ready to face but couldn't deny. And as the moonlight stretched across my window, I realized the harvest wasn't the only thing that had begun. The morning came heavy with mist, the kind that settles low and makes the world seem quiet and secret. I woke earlier than usual, restless from a night of tossing, my thoughts tangled with the memory of her laugh and the taste she left behind. I tried to tell myself it was foolish, that it was nothing more than a passing moment, but every time I closed my eyes I saw her face again, the way she looked at me like she had known me longer than a stranger should. I tried to throw myself into work, to let the earth and the fruit steady me, but the soil felt different beneath my fingers, as though it carried the memory of what happened yesterday. Each berry I picked reminded me of her, and the more I tried to forget, the more she pressed into my mind. By noon the sun was breaking through the mist, and I had gathered more than I needed. I decided to take a rest by the old tree that leaned just beyond the fence line. I sat with my back against its trunk, closed my eyes, and let the wind cool my skin. That's when I heard the crunch of footsteps in the grass. My chest tightened instantly, a mix of fear and hope swelling all at once, and when I opened my eyes, there she was again. She stood a little farther away this time, holding her shoes in her hands like she had walked barefoot through the field just to find me. There was no laughter this time, only a steady gaze, her eyes carrying something softer, heavier. I wanted to speak, to demand why she kept coming back, but my words caught again. She didn't wait for me to invite her closer, she simply sat down beside me, close enough that her shoulder almost brushed mine, and I could smell her, something like wildflowers and sun-warmed skin. For a long moment neither of us spoke. We just sat there in the shade of that tree, the world hushed around us, the silence thick with something unspoken. Finally, she broke it. "You looked lonely yesterday," she said quietly, almost as though she regretted her own words. I turned to her, confused, defensive. "I wasn't lonely," I said too quickly, too sharply. But the truth was, I was. Days on the farm stretched endlessly, filled with work and little else, my own thoughts echoing back at me louder than I cared to admit. She smiled a little, not unkindly, just knowingly, and I hated that she could see through me so easily. "Maybe not," she said, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. "But you looked like someone who needed to be seen." Those words landed harder than I expected. I wanted to deny it, to push her away with silence, but instead my throat tightened and I felt a sudden sting in my eyes. I blinked it back quickly, unwilling to show weakness, but she noticed. She didn't laugh this time. She reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched the back of my hand. Her fingers were warm, steady, patient, like she was offering me something without asking for anything in return. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Instead, I let her stay there, our hands resting together in the dirt, the simplest contact turning into something that made my whole body hum. The air between us shifted again, heavier now, not with mischief but with something far more real. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that brushed against my skin. "I don't want to scare you," she said, "but I feel like I've been looking for this." My heart pounded so loud I thought she must have heard it. I couldn't find the right words, couldn't explain how terrified and alive I felt all at once. Instead, I just looked at her, really looked, and I saw it, the same fear, the same ache, mirrored back in her eyes. It was then I realized that whatever this was, it wasn't one-sided. She was just as caught as I was. The afternoon faded as we sat beneath that tree, the silence no longer uncomfortable but full of a fragile kind of trust. We didn't move our hands apart, didn't need to. And when the light began to slip and the chill crept in, she finally stood, brushing off her dress, her hand leaving mine slowly, reluctantly, like she didn't want to let go. She looked down at me one last time, her smile softer now, tinged with something unspoken, and said only, "I'll see you again." Then she walked away, barefoot across the grass, leaving me with the weight of her touch still burning in my skin and the dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, she meant it. That night I lay awake again, but this time I didn't fight it. I let myself remember every word, every glance, every second of that afternoon. I told myself it was foolish, that nothing good could come from letting someone slip so easily into my guarded world. But deep down, I knew the truth, I didn't want her to stop. The days that followed stretched like a thread pulled too tight. I tried to keep my hands busy, tried to let the work drown me out the way it always had, but every corner of the farm seemed to carry her shadow. The tree where she sat with me, the path where she walked barefoot, even the berries that stained my palms seemed to whisper her name. I told myself she wouldn't come back, that she had said those words, "I'll see you again," only to tease me, only to keep me restless. But hope has a way of digging in like roots, no matter how much you try to pull it out. Each morning I found myself scanning the fence line, pretending it was just habit, pretending I wasn't waiting. And then one morning she was there. No laughter this time, no sudden surprise. She came with a basket of her own, swinging it lightly at her side as if she belonged here, as if the earth itself had invited her. My breath caught again, but I tried to stand tall, to look busy, not desperate. She smiled when our eyes met, a soft, knowing smile that made my chest ache, and without asking she slipped under the fence and stepped into the rows of berries beside me. She knelt down, close enough that our arms brushed, and began picking as though she had done it her whole life. I wanted to protest, to ask her why she thought she could just invade my world like this, but the words wouldn't form. Instead, I watched her hands, delicate yet certain, her fingers quick but careful, her basket filling steadily. There was something mesmerizing about the way she worked, like she carried ease in her bones, a rhythm that matched the field. For a while, we didn't speak, only the sound of our baskets filling and the rustle of leaves between us. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice low but light. "It feels different when you do it with someone, doesn't it?" I didn't answer right away. I hated that she was right. The work felt less like a burden, more like a shared secret, and even the sun didn't feel so heavy when she was beside me. I muttered, maybe, trying to sound indifferent, but she smiled like she could hear what I wasn't saying. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and when our baskets were full, she leaned back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. She looked at me, really looked, her eyes lingering in a way that made my breath stumble. "You're not used to being seen, are you?" she asked. The words cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to deny it, to tell her she didn't know me, but my throat tightened around the truth. No one had ever asked me that before, no one had cared to. I stared at the ground, my chest heavy, and for the first time I whispered, "No. I'm not." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable this time, it was heavy, full of understanding. She reached out again, just like before, but this time she didn't stop at my hand. Her fingers brushed along my arm, up to my shoulder, lingering there as though she was grounding me, holding me in place when the weight of my own confession threatened to crush me. I didn't move. I couldn't. My skin burned where she touched me, and for once I didn't want to hide it. She leaned closer then, her voice softer, almost fragile. "Then let me see you." My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might break free. The world tilted in that moment, the air thick and electric, and I knew I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't step back from. I wanted to resist, to tell her it was too much, too fast, too dangerous. But instead, I lifted my eyes to hers, and in them I saw no judgment, no pity, only a raw, unspoken truth that matched the ache inside me. The distance between us disappeared. I don't remember moving, don't remember choosing, but suddenly her lips were on mine. It was gentle at first, uncertain, like both of us were testing the ground beneath us. But then it deepened, slow and steady, a warmth that spread through me until I couldn't tell where she ended and I began. My hands trembled as they found her waist, holding her like she might vanish if I didn't. She tasted of the fruit we had picked, sweet and wild, and I realized I had never felt so alive. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, she rested her forehead against mine and whispered, "See? Not so lonely anymore." I wanted to cry, wanted to laugh, wanted to run and stay all at once. Instead, I clung to her, afraid that if I let go the world would collapse back into the emptiness it had been before she arrived. For the first time in so long, I didn't feel invisible. For the first time, someone had not only seen me but chosen me. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the fields in gold, I knew with a certainty that scared me more than anything else. I didn't want her to ever leave. Nights began to blur together after that storm, each one drawing me deeper into her world. At first, I thought I would only visit once or twice more, that the pull I felt would eventually weaken, but instead it grew stronger with every step I took through that heavy wooden door. She no longer needed to ask me why I returned. She knew. I knew. The silence between us held the answer. What unsettled me was how quickly I grew comfortable in the space that had once terrified me. The sight of her instruments no longer made me flinch. The smell of roses mixed with chemicals no longer felt foreign. Her presence no longer felt like a weight pressing on my chest, but like a tether keeping me from floating away. We began to talk more, not about death or her work, but about things that stretched far beyond those walls. She asked me about my childhood, about the places I once called home, about the dreams I let slip away because I was too afraid to chase them. I found myself speaking truths I had never spoken aloud, admitting how lost I often felt, how different, how out of place in a world that seemed to demand masks and performances I never wanted to wear. She listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her hands folded in her lap as if every word I gave her was worth holding on to. And when she finally spoke of her own life, it was with a softness that made me ache. She told me about her younger years, about the woman she had loved so fiercely, about the way the world had looked at them with disdain. She confessed how that judgment had driven them into hiding, how love had been forced into shadows until one day it disappeared altogether, leaving her with silence she couldn't fill. The more she spoke, the less she seemed like a stranger to me. The more I learned, the more I felt the invisible threads weaving us together. I began staying longer, long after the tasks were done, long after midnight had passed, just sitting with her in the dim light, our words spilling out slowly like confessions we had been waiting years to release. Sometimes we laughed, and the sound startled both of us, echoing against the walls like a defiance of the grief that clung to the room. Other times we fell into stretches of quiet, but it wasn't the cold silence of before. It was warm, alive, filled with meaning without needing words. I noticed the changes in her too. The rigid lines of her posture softened. The guarded sharpness in her tone faded. And though she still carried herself with that same unshakable grace, I saw glimpses of something else beneath it, something vulnerable. She no longer hid her hands behind her back when she spoke. Sometimes they lingered on the table, sometimes they brushed against mine when she passed me an instrument, and each time they did, a spark ran through me so strong it left me breathless. I began to crave those accidental touches, the unspoken permission in the way her fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary. One evening, as the clock ticked past midnight, I caught her looking at me differently. Her eyes no longer studied me like a student or even like a mirror of the woman she had lost. They studied me with hunger, with longing, with a tenderness that made my chest ache. I froze under that gaze, heat rising to my cheeks, but I didn't look away. I couldn't. For a long moment, it felt as if time itself had stilled, as if the storm outside, the weight of the world, even the air between us, all of it bent around the silent gravity pulling us closer. It was she who broke the silence first. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but every syllable cut through the stillness like a blade. I shouldn't feel this way, she admitted, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. I told myself I would never open my heart again, not after her. But then you walked in and, she trailed off, shaking her head as if she couldn't bring herself to finish. My heart raced, my throat tightening, but I knew what she was trying to say because I felt it too. The tension between us had been building with every word, every touch, every glance, and now it hung in the air so thick I could barely breathe. I stepped closer without realizing it, drawn to her as if my body had made the decision before my mind could interfere. When I reached out, my hand brushed against hers, and she didn't pull away. Her fingers twitched slightly, then intertwined with mine, fragile at first, like she was afraid the world might shatter if she held on too tightly. The air left my lungs in a rush, and I realized how long I had been waiting for that moment, how long I had been holding my breath without knowing it. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the war she was fighting, the fear of breaking her promise to the past, the guilt of loving again, the hunger for something she could no longer deny. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Instead, I leaned closer, and when my lips touched hers, the world fell away. It wasn't the kind of kiss born of desperation or recklessness. It was slow, trembling, filled with the weight of everything unspoken between us. Her lips were warm, hesitant at first, then deeper, more certain, as if she had finally allowed herself to let go. When we pulled apart, the silence that followed was thick with everything we couldn't put into words. My chest rose and fell in rapid rhythm, my heart racing so wildly I thought it might burst. She kept her forehead against mine, her breath mingling with mine, and whispered, almost brokenly, "I don't know what will happen now." My hand tightened around hers, and I whispered back, "Neither do I. But I don't want to stop." For the first time since stepping into that studio, I felt no fear at all. Not of her, not of the locked door, not of what it meant to be in this place. The only thing that scared me now was how deeply I already needed her, and how powerless I was to resist what was unfolding between us. The rain left the fields heavy with scent, the soil rich and dark, the air thick with a dampness that clung to my skin long after the storm had passed. That night I lay awake again, my body aching from work but my mind refusing to rest, replaying every second under that tree, every drop of rain that had mixed with her touch. The memory of her lips was still raw, almost painful, and yet I pressed my hand to my chest as if I could hold it there, keep it from fading. Morning came too soon, and with it came the fear I had tried to keep at bay. Out here, people noticed things. Whispers traveled faster than the wind. A glance held too long, a laugh shared too easily, it all carried weight, and I knew that if anyone saw us the way we were together, it would not be met with kindness. I told myself I should keep distance, that I should build the walls back up before it was too late, but when I stepped outside and saw her already waiting by the fence, barefoot in the wet grass, smiling like I was the only thing she had been searching for, my resolve cracked. She waved, casual, as if nothing between us had changed, as if the storm hadn't bound us in ways that couldn't be undone. I wanted to stay where I was, to guard myself, but my feet betrayed me and carried me forward until I stood before her, the dampness of the morning chilling my arms. "You came early," I said, my voice soft, unsure, but she only shrugged and grinned. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, her eyes locking onto mine in that way that made everything else fall silent. We walked the rows together, baskets in hand, the world around us quiet except for the sound of our steps and the rustle of leaves. The closeness between us was different now, heavier, every brush of her shoulder against mine sparking through me like lightning. At one point she stopped, watching me as I bent to gather fruit, her gaze steady, almost reverent. "You don't even know what you look like when you work, do you?" she said suddenly. I froze, confused, unsure how to respond. She stepped closer, her hand grazing my arm as she whispered, "Like someone who belongs here, but like someone who deserves more." The words sank into me, unsettling, stirring something I had long buried. No one had ever spoken to me like that, seen me like that, and I felt the tears burn at the back of my eyes though I refused to let them fall. I turned away, my hands trembling as I dropped berries into the basket, but she didn't let me retreat. She placed her hand on my back, gentle, steady, and I felt myself leaning into her touch without meaning to. "You don't have to hide," she said, her voice low, carrying the weight of something more than comfort. "Not with me." The air between us grew thick, and when I finally turned, her face was so close I could see the flecks of gold in her eyes. My chest rose and fell unevenly, fear clawing at me, but also a pull so strong I couldn't resist. Our lips met again, slower this time, softer, not driven by storm or urgency but by something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to love. The kiss lingered, stretching time, and when it broke, she pressed her forehead against mine and whispered, "I don't care what they say. I'm not letting go." The words terrified me because I knew what the world could do to people like us. I knew the cruelty of eyes that judged, of voices that cut sharper than any blade. But as I looked at her, As I felt her hand grip mine tightly like she could anchor me against every storm, I also knew I didn't want to let go either. We stood there in the field, the sun beginning to rise, casting its light over us like a secret blessing. For the first time, I let myself smile without fear, even if only for that fragile moment. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how long we could keep the world out, but I knew this: she had become the one place where I could breathe. And for now, that was enough. The summer deepened, the fields bursting with color and life, but inside me there was a storm I couldn't quiet. Every day she came, and every day I felt myself sink deeper into her, like roots twisting into soil, impossible to pull free without tearing something vital. We picked fruit together, shared quiet meals under the tree, and sometimes we didn't need to speak at all because the silence between us was full, heavy with the kind of understanding that made words unnecessary. Yet beneath the sweetness was the shadow of something I could not ignore. It lingered in the way I flinched whenever I thought I saw someone watching from the road, in the way my stomach knotted when her laugh rang too loudly across the fields. I had lived long enough to know how people whispered, how quickly affection could turn into a weapon in the mouths of others. I wanted to shield her from that, but she moved through the world unafraid, as if daring anyone to question the light she carried. One evening, after the work was done and the baskets were stacked, she stayed behind instead of leaving. The air was cooler then, the sky painted with streaks of pink and orange, and she walked with me to the edge of the field where the tall grass swayed. We sat together, our hands brushing until finally intertwining, and I felt her squeeze mine with quiet certainty. "You're afraid," she said, her voice steady, not accusing but honest. My breath caught, and I looked away, the truth too sharp to face. She didn't let me escape. She turned my hand in hers, pressing her palm to mine, grounding me. "You don't have to be." I wanted to laugh, bitter and broken, because she didn't understand how heavy fear could be, how it built itself into your bones until it was the only thing holding you up. "It's not that simple," I whispered, but even as I said it I hated the weakness in my voice. She leaned closer, her eyes fierce but tender, and for a moment I felt small under the weight of her belief. "It is," she insisted. "It's only simple if you want it enough." Her words struck something in me I wasn't ready to face, because I did want it, more than anything, but wanting and having were never the same. I turned to her then, the fire of the setting sun catching in her hair, and for the first time I let myself imagine what it would mean if I stopped hiding. What it would mean if I chose her, fully, openly, without the walls I had built to keep the world out. The thought terrified me, but it also filled me with a longing so strong it made my chest ache. She reached up and touched my cheek, her thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "I see you," she whispered, and those 3 words unraveled me completely. I leaned into her hand, desperate for the warmth she offered, and then her lips were on mine again, slow and certain, a kiss that felt less like fire this time and more like a vow. The world around us faded, the swaying grass, the fading light, the distant hum of evening insects, and there was only her, holding me together with a gentleness that felt like strength. When we pulled apart, she rested her head against my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck. We sat there long after the sun disappeared, the stars pricking through the dark, and for the first time I didn't care who might see. For the first time, the fear loosened its grip, even if just a little, replaced by something stronger, something that felt dangerously like freedom. And as the night wrapped around us, I realized I wasn't just falling for her, I had already fallen, and there was no going back. The days grew longer and heavier as harvest reached its peak, and while my hands were busy, my heart was always caught in the same place, circling around her like a moth desperate for light. By now, she was no longer a visitor in my world. She had woven herself into the fabric of my days, into the rhythm of the farm, into the quiet hours of dusk when we sat beneath the old tree as if it had been planted for us alone. But the closer we became, the harder it was to pretend the outside world did not exist. It came in small cracks at first, in the way a neighbor paused too long at the gate when she saw us standing too close, in the way my aunt's voice sharpened when she asked why a girl from town kept coming around, in the way people's eyes lingered with suspicion instead of warmth. The whispers began, carried like smoke on the wind, hard to catch but impossible to ignore. I felt them pressing on me when I walked into the market, when I traded fruit for bread, when I heard sudden silences follow after laughter. The weight of being seen differently settled back into my bones, and fear returned like an old wound that never healed right. She noticed, of course. She always noticed. One evening when the sky was streaked with the last gold of sunset, she caught my hand as I tried to pull away too quickly. "Don't do that," she said, her eyes sharp, her grip firm. "Don't let them take this from us." My throat tightened, words tumbling in me like stones. "You don't understand," I whispered. "They'll never let this be. They'll turn it into something ugly, something wrong." Her jaw set, her eyes burning with a fire that both terrified and moved me. "Let them," she said. "Let them choke on their own bitterness. I'm not ashamed, and neither should you be." Her defiance made my chest ache, because I wanted to be like her, fearless and unshaken, but the truth was I had lived too long under the shadow of judgment. I knew how sharp words could cut, how cruel silence could feel, how isolation could hollow you out until you became nothing more than a shell. That night, lying awake with her words echoing in my head, I wrestled with the truth I didn't want to admit. I loved her. I loved her in a way that felt like both salvation and ruin, a way that lit my soul but threatened to burn everything else I had built to protect myself. The next morning, I saw her waiting for me again, her basket at her side, her smile soft but steady, and I realized she wasn't going anywhere. She had chosen me, despite the whispers, despite the stares, despite the risk. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I chose her back, no matter the cost. That evening we walked through the field, our hands brushing, neither of us pulling away, and when we reached the tree, she leaned into me with a sigh that carried both relief and exhaustion. "Promise me," she said, her voice quiet but trembling with weight. "Promise me you won't run." I turned to her, my heart thundering, my fear clawing, but when I looked into her eyes I saw something stronger than both of us, a love that refused to hide, a love that demanded to be lived. And in that moment, with the sun sinking behind us and the world trying to press its weight upon us, I whispered the only truth I had left. "I promise." The promise I made beneath that tree became the anchor that held me steady in the days that followed, even when the world outside our small sanctuary began to close in tighter. The whispers grew sharper, no longer hiding in corners but slipping into conversations I couldn't escape. At the market, I felt eyes cutting into my back, felt the shift in tone when I approached a stall, the way words were measured and clipped as if I had suddenly turned into someone unfamiliar. My aunt's voice became colder too, her questions sharper, her suspicion heavy as stones. "People are talking," she warned one night at supper, her gaze piercing as though she wanted to pin me to my chair. I said nothing, my chest hollowing out, my hands trembling beneath the table where she couldn't see. Fear pressed against me harder than it ever had before, but when I thought of her, of the way she smiled when she leaned into me, of the way she said my name as though it was worth something, of the way she looked at me like I was not invisible but entirely alive, I knew there was no turning back. That night I went to the tree where we always met, and she was already waiting, her basket forgotten at her feet, her arms wrapped around herself as though she too had felt the shift in the air. When she saw me, she stood, and the tension in her shoulders melted as she reached for my hand. I held it without hesitation, gripping it tightly as though the world might try to rip us apart. "They know," I whispered, the words tasting bitter, heavy. She didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her forehead resting against mine, her voice steady. "Let them. We know too." The strength in her tone made my chest ache. For so long I had carried the weight of hiding, the burden of fear, but she carried light as though it belonged to her, as though she could hand it to me if only I would take it. And in that moment, I did. I leaned into her, our lips meeting again in a kiss that felt less like defiance and more like truth, a truth neither of us could deny anymore. The fields around us were silent except for the hum of the night, the stars stretching above, bearing witness to something that no whispers could destroy. We held each other for what felt like forever, and when we finally pulled apart, her eyes shone with determination. "This is ours," she said firmly. "They don't get to take it." I nodded, tears spilling despite myself, because for the first time I believed her. I believed that love, in its raw and fearless form, was stronger than the walls built to contain it. The days after were not easy. The whispers grew into stares, the stares into quiet hostility, but we faced it together. She walked with me through the fields, her head high, her hand brushing mine, and though fear still lived in my chest, it no longer ruled me. Each time I looked at her, I remembered the promise I made, that I would not run, not from her, not from myself, not from the love that had finally given me breath. And so I stayed. We stayed. Even as the world turned its gaze upon us, even as the silence of others became louder than words, we built something unshakable in the spaces that belonged only to us, the fields, the tree, the quiet nights when we lay side by side listening to the heartbeat of the earth and knowing that ours had finally found a rhythm of their own. I had feared that loving her would mean losing everything, but instead, I found that loving her gave me everything I had ever longed for. Not safety, not approval, not ease, but something far more precious, the freedom to be seen, to be known, to be loved without condition. And as the seasons shifted and the fields prepared to rest, I realized that our love was its own kind of harvest, hard-earned and tender, born from risk and defiance, but ripened into something I would never let go.